I'm Lynn Edwards and I'm a quilt maker, and I've worked with Creative Grids for some years now, and the latest ruler that we've come up with is for the Storm at Sea, which is a traditional block. This is the ruler. It has everything you need on it to making a 16-inch block, which is what we're after. And this is the block itself. That's the Storm at Sea block. You can see in the quilt behind me how it's developed into a bigger quilt, 9 blocks altogether, and how although every edge is straight, you still have that lovely wavy look to it, hence its title of course. That's mine. This is a smaller quilt made by Birgitta Bennett in very striking, stunning colours. Shows you can do all sorts and enjoy yourself with it. Not only can you make Storm at Sea, you can use the same ruler to make different patchwork blocks. That's one. It produces these lovely tall triangles, which are very effective, I think. This is another small block. And finally, a small quilt done the same way. These lovely tall triangles. Same ruler, different effect. Let's take a closer look at the Storm at Sea block. It's quite a complicated block. There are 3 different design elements. You've got the long diamond shape, which is here, here, and the top and bottom. You have a lovely centre block, which is a square, within a square, within a square. And you have the 4 corners that repeat that pattern of a square and a square and a square. If you notice, this long diamond here has a seam across it. It isn't usually there. So traditionally, the long diamond is one piece of fabric, but we found that if you took that shape, it was very wasteful. This is the way to do it if you want to use a strip ruler and to save your fabric, and I think it works very well. If you look at the design, a lot of different shapes all over, which is what I think has put people off making this block. And with the ruler, we've tried to make it as simple as we can. The bottom part of the ruler, along here is a regular ruler with markings and up the side. But in the centre area you can see we've cleared it of any marked line that's not needed in the design. So every line that is needed is clearly labelled and marked beautifully like that. At the bottom of these triangles we have a circle cut in so that you can cut with a rotary cutter into the circle very easily. Coming closer, here you can see what's happened. We've been able to use that space to document the block. Here is the block itself with its measurement, 16 inches by 16 inches. Here are the long diamonds and where they come in the design, the 4 corner blocks and the centre larger design. You can see the clear markings of the lines here that you do need in the design. And taking a rotary cutter, if I just show, as we come down here, how much room there is to go into the hole, can you see there's a cut-off corner? You also can cut along there. So all the things you need are there ready to be used. Here is the long diamond unit that we're going to make. The centre part has the strips which are 4.5 inches long, and there's a double layer of fabric, and we need at least 13 inches in length. So here is my double layer of fabric, right sides facing. The edge has been straightened, and now I need to cut a strip from it that's 4.5 inches wide. And for that, I'll take the Storm at Sea ruler, and I'm going to use the ruler side. Not the pointed side, the ruler side. And what people aren't always aware of is that if you notice here, I'm not using any of the marks on the table, on the board. I'm using the ruler. And I'm going to move it across the fabric until the line on the ruler that's marked 4.5, very clearly, there, lines up with the edge. I can hold the ruler firmly and I can then cut along that edge. What I have underneath the ruler is what I need, a 4.5 inch double strip. Here are my 2 strips. You can see what I've done is I've stitched a 1/4 inch seam on either long side. And if you look at that, that is actually what I would call a scant 1/4 inch. You can see it beautifully because I've done it in light thread. I wouldn't normally do it in light thread. I tend to go definitely darker than the fabric. So then that way it really doesn't show. But it is a scant 1/4, which you really should do if you can, because with patchwork so often the seams are pressed to one side and that takes up space. And sometimes you find that your finished blocks are a little smaller than they're needed. A tip for you, if you have the facility on your machine, move your needle one place to the right, closer to the side of the 1/4 inch foot, and that makes it that little bit scant. So I have done the 2 scant 1/4 inch seams, and now I'm ready to cut my triangles. I'm going to cut the big triangles from here. I'm lining up the 4.5 inch line with the bottom of the strip, and you should find the top beautifully fits against the other edge of the fabric. If you can see here, this is where I'm going to cut. I need 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, so I can safely start here. I've positioned it at a slight angle, you can see that, so that when I do cut, I can get very comfortably down there, change my position, come up there, change again, so that the cutter is always held in a comfortable position. And like that. And I will have cut 1, 2, 3, 4 double triangles at this stage. And a very little stitching at the sharp corner. This stitching you can take undone now, either with a stitch ripper or just by easing the seam open with your fingers. Once done, you can then press that seam open like that, trim off the corners, and you've got your lovely diamond. Next stage is the 4 side triangles. And here is the strip cut ready for the side triangles. 2 layers, right sides facing, 4.5 inches deep. The length doesn't matter, it's as long as you need. You will need 8 pairs of these side triangles to make one block. Taking the ruler, put the 4.5 lining on the bottom edge as before, and you should find, hopefully, the top matches beautifully to the top of the strip. And you're going to cut right to the top. I'm showing you in real life here because I want you to see just how you deal with these odd little corners. Straight down to the bottom, up to there again, and down to there, which is as far as you can go with the ruler as it is. You would simply keep moving the ruler down the strip and cut as many as you need. Now we've got a little corner here to be nipped off. Before you do it, just pull these ones out, slide them out, get your rotary cutter in here, trim off those little corners, like so. Here, you do the same here if I've taken it any further. This one, of course, has to be treated on its own. Take it round, put the ruler back over it, and nibble your little corner. And there we are. And for the block, you would need 8 pairs of that. So now we've cut the side triangles and we can arrange them around the centre like this. And what I'm going to do is sew them on in pairs. So I'm going to leave those off for the minute. These nibbed corners here were for a purpose, because if you turn them over, you can match exactly either end of the main diamond and the triangles. Same with this one. Get them to match beautifully, which they will. Pin them, stitch them both on, press the side triangles outwards. Like that. And we have the last 2. Now when you sew these 2 on, when you arrange them, ignore these purpley pieces, flip it over and match it with the edges of the centre. So look underneath and check that that matches beautifully. Pin it, the same with this side, over there. Sew along, iron them out, and you will have your completed centre long diamond with corners on. Trim the top and bottom off nicely. You need 4 of those, and that's the hard part of the block done. So the next task is to do the lovely centre area, a square surrounded by a square and another square. And all the measurements we need to cut these pieces are done on the ruler. The centre is cut from a 4.5 inch square. These corners here are from a 5.25 inch square, which is then cut into 4. And the final corners are 2 squares, each 4 7/8. So we'll just do that. This is the centre square for the block, and it's a 4.5 inch cut square. And I've used the ruler to do it. I first of all cut a 4.5 inch strip using the line that runs right the way along the ruler, and then I cut the end. And that gives me a 4.5 inch square, which is the first central square of that block. For the next row out, I have to have a larger square, which is 5.25 inches. And again, see, there's a 5.25 line that runs right the way along, and I've put it underneath with the 5.25 line and trimmed the edge, and that's my block. If you can see, there are lines diagonally across it, and it has to be cut into 4, which will give me then, having done that, 4 triangles, and these will go all around that centre square. And finally, there are 2 squares, and each of them is cut 4 7/8, which is quite a tricky measurement. But it's not too bad here because we've got 4 7/8 as a line along the ruler and on here, and we just trim the edge as before. And each of those 2 squares is cut diagonally into 2, which will give us 4 corners, which will be the final 4 corners of that centre block. Firstly, the inner corners have to be sewn on that centre. And here's a tip for you. You match the centre, and this is what I do. I take the centre square and I pinch it at either end to start with to find the middle, and I put it down again. And you can probably see that the crease I've made is coming upwards like that. So this is going to come down onto it. If I crease this in the same direction, it's very nice when I arrange that on then that they will nest in the middle. Pin that on, do the same with the one that's opposite, and sew those 2 on. Once those are stitched, press them out, leaving the seam going out from the centre, and repeat it with the side ones. So then these 4 will be attached. And finally do exactly the same with this, matching the centres on these 4 corners, and that will be your centre block. Magically complete. So now we've just got the 4 small corner squares to do, which are exactly the same as that centre block, but on a small scale. So you follow those directions exactly, but the measurements are smaller. So the centre square is a 2.5 inch square, and here we are on the ruler, the 2.5 inch line, right the way across the ruler, and that's to make the square. The next round out is 3.25, and here it is, 3.25 inch line, right the way along and up there. And the final corners of the corner blocks is 2 7/8, which is a very tricky measurement. There it is, 2 7/8, right the way along there and up there. So all the measurements you need for those corner blocks are right there on the ruler and very clear. So now we have all the pieces for our final block. There's the centre, the 4 baby blocks in the corners, and the 4 long diamonds. The only thing to do now, of course, is to join them together. And you can see, looking along these seams, there are some quite tricky junctions to be done. And I'm very careful about these. I will put a pin exactly through the point of one and its opposite number, pull it through and match them beautifully. And then I will often put a pin either side. But what I also would suggest, and this is a nice little tip somebody gave me, is that when you have a whole series like this, is to pin right the way along there, but then set your sewing machine stitch slightly longer and just sew like an inch either side, just across the nasty bits there. Because then as you open them out and look at them, if you've got to unpick something, which sometimes we have to do, let's face it, it's very easy to unpick a very short distance. most of them will be fine, but the odd one, it's so much easier to take out. And once you've got them all nice, then you can sew the entire length. I found that's quite a helpful tip to have. I think it's a very dramatic and handsome block, and I'm rather hoping that by the time you've done this one, you'll be hooked and you'll want to go on to make a bigger quilt. A bit like this. This is 9 blocks put together, but you can make it bigger or smaller or vital and interesting like Birgitta's. Just, I'm hoping that you're going to want to do a lot more of it. So that's it. I hope I've been able to show you how straightforward and easy it is to use the ruler to make this lovely traditional block. Hopefully your quilts will be wonderful when you finish them, and I shall enjoy seeing them.